Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today we're getting into the Week 13 fantasy football slate, helping you set your lineups at the wide receiver position. Start sit wide receivers for every single game. I'll be talking about every single wide receiver. We've had, I feel like, pretty good feel for things now with the tail end of the season. We should by now with all the information that we have on our hands to be able to help you set your lineups. If you guys have questions, if you guys enjoy today's video, would really appreciate if you did hit that like button for me. Let me know that you're enjoying this type of content, this style of video, this type of information I'm getting to you. And if you are new, hit that subscribe button as we help you win that fantasy title. Guys, we are live as well, 11 a.m. Eastern time on the OwnersBox Sports Twitch. If you guys are looking for last minute fantasy advice, I can get that to you. OwnersBox Sports on Twitch. I'll include the link to follow us there in the description. Let's get into these matchups. First up, Chargers at the Patriots. And man, people are betting the under in this game. I know the Chargers defense showed up last week. It doesn't mean it's going to show up every week. And these are two of the worst pass defenses in the league between the Patriots and the Chargers. The Chargers 27th in EPA against the pass. The Patriots 25th. The Chargers 30th in fantasy points allowed, and the Patriots 23rd. So these passing games should find plenty of success here. You know, the Chargers have a decent pass rush, or less Joey Bosa. Khalil Mack's had a great year. And then from the Patriots side, not a terrible, a pass rush that's more in the middle of the road this season, hasn't done anything crazy. It's just going to be about whether or not, does the matchup that the Patriots have offensively result in them finding production? Because it looks like it's going to be Bailey Zappi at quarterback. That's going to be whatever you think it is. Is it a benefit? I have no idea. I don't know if this is a Bailey Zappi thing. I don't know if this is an offensive play calling thing. Is this a Mac Jones thing? It kind of seems like it. Mac Jones is just childish quarterback play. It's crazy. Anyways, what do we want to do with the wide receivers here? Keenan Allen's going to be a start for you each and every week. Quentin Johnston was not injured. He was injured. He was hurt, not injured, and he was just benched last week. He's just been absolutely awful. No reason to start him. Jalen Guyton will get on the field. Doesn't mean you should play him, even in a good matchup. As for the Patriots, don't think we'll be seeing Demario Douglas with that concussion. Do feel good about Devontae Parker. I know I'm in some a pinch with some of my bye weeks, especially missing some Ravens that I do have on my team. So Devontae Parker is in my lineup for one of my teams. Feel pretty good about that. Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyquan Thornton, those guys are a little bit more risky. I know Parker's going to be on the field a ton. We could see these tight ends produce for the Patriots as well. So that puts a damper into the wide receiver 2 and 3 on this team. Broncos at the Texans. Man, you look at this game probably in week 3, you're not that excited about it, but now pretty important game in the AFC playoff picture, so excited to see this game. The Broncos have improved quite a bit from the perspective of pass defense. Run defense is still terrible, but EPA-wise, they're 26th in pass EPA, so they're not technically an incredible team, but fantasy points-wise, it does reflect 7th in fantasy points allowed. For some reason, the Browns, I thought, took a terrible approach last week. Kevin Stefanski, I just cannot fathom how you're throwing the ball that much with DTR, a quarterback with limited experience when your run game's moving the ball. Everyone can run the ball in this Broncos team. I think the Texans will be able to do that effectively too, but they have not been a great running team this season. So I still think they'll rely on C.J. Stroud and his arm as well. As good as the Broncos have done from a fantasy perspective, coverage grade's not good. Pass rush is super underwhelming. And that EPA I mentioned as well. As for the Texans, they no longer a top 10 unit in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I think it's because their run defense is getting a lot better, and it has been in the last 4 or 5 weeks, I would say. 24th in EPA against the pass. So I think you will see some success here from their passing unit, from Russell Wilson and the Broncos passing offense in this game. We could see some points here. So Courtland Sutton is a guy I do really like. The Texans are giving up the second highest completion percentage on passes of 20+ air yards and the highest, or the second most completions of 20+ air yards. For Sutton, he has the most targets, most deep targets, and he also has the most on the team. And then he has the 8th most deep ball receptions this season in the entire league. So feel great about Sutton. Sneaky good target share. It's like over 23% on the season. A huge bounce back for him. Judy, Mims, it's a little bit more murky. I don't absolutely love this matchup. I think the Texans are still pretty solid pass defense, but and for me, really, I got to see a little bit more from Judy. If I got to see a good week, and then maybe I could go to him. I'm not going to just take the shot on him unless I get a really good matchup. I don't think the Texans are a really good matchup. I think they're just a middle of the road matchup. As for the Texans and their offense, it's honestly, at this point, I don't think you can really sit Nico Collins and Tank Dell. They're so capable of hitting explosive plays on any given down that you're just going to get crushed sometimes if you sit them. Either one of these guys can put up 100 yards and a touchdown like it's nothing on a couple of catches. These guys are far too explosive. I think this game will be competitive. I mentioned that I think the Texans can run the ball effectively, but again, I don't know how much they will lean on it here because they're just so much better off with the ball in C.J. Stroud's hands. Lions at the Saints. Man, the Lions are really in need of a bounce back here after a couple of rough weeks. And even like you include the last 2 weeks of the Packers and then the Bears win, they also beat the Chargers and gave up a ton of points. So defensively, they need to shore things up. And the Saints could potentially give them the chance to do so. On the season, the Lions are 26th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. But the thing is for the Saints, and why I say this could be a get-right spot for their pass defense, is we're going to have no Michael Thomas. I think we want to have Chris Olave, and I'm starting to think we're not going to have Rashid Shaheed either, and that's going to put a really big damper on this Saints receiving core. It's not very good. It'll be funny when I show you the start-sit spot here. But for the Lions offense, the Saints, without Marcus Lattimore, take a little bit of a step back, but they're top 10 in all these important categories for me: coverage grade, EPA, fantasy points allowed. They're 6th of the position. So as much as the Lions can kind of move the ball against anyone, does put a bit of pause in terms of the ceiling for this passing offense. And that puts me in the spot where Amon St. Brown is going to be someone I'm definitely going to be starting, but Josh Reynolds, Jameson Williams, the litany of other options, those are guys I'm not looking to be playing because this matchup isn't quite good enough. The Saints, I like Jawan Johnson. I talked about him in our must-start short on the YouTube channel and on our TikTok, but what I don't like is playing any of these receivers. There's a potential of Derek Carr hitting one of these guys on a deep ball. I think A.T. Perry has the best chance to do so. Just too risky for me. I think Perry is like a wide receiver 5. These other guys are just not playable, not enough consistency. Bowden got on the field a fair bit. Kirkwood didn't as much. You can't take the chance on these guys at this point in the year. Cardinals at the Steelers. I think this game could sneaky give us a lot of points when you look at the Steelers' struggles to some of these outside wide receivers, the Cardinals' struggles of playing defense at all. And I think we're going to have a potential spot here for what I think is an opportunity for the Cardinals, for the Steelers and Kenny Pickett to be well protected in this game. I think there's a decent chance that we can see them, potentially move the ball effectively if they don't have that big pass rush presence. Now for the Cardinals, they're dealing with the pass rush presence with TJ Watt. But on the season, the Steelers are 25th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, so they have given a fair bit up, but 7th in EPA against the pass. They are a good unit overall. It's those outside guys, like I mentioned, constantly every week I feel like that they do get crushed by. Cardinals, 31st in EPA against the pass, one of the worst in the league. Coverage grade extremely low as well. Fantasy points wise, not quite in the bottom 10, just because I think a lot of teams have been leading games, don't need to press too hard in the passing game, can run the ball effectively. We saw Kyron Williams last week find the end zone a number of times and produce in the receiving game too. Now with the Cardinals, I do like Marquise Brown. I know he's banged up. I know he didn't practice on Wednesday, I believe. I didn't see his status from Thursday, but I really think it's just a cautious approach from the team. I think he will play. Finally saw those targets take a massive boost up. I think he had 12 targets, 6 receptions, and over 80 receiving yards. I don't think he can necessarily do the exact same thing, but I think he can come pretty close in this game. Feel pretty good about him. Greg Dortch has been getting on the field and seems to be dating back to last season, this target that Kyler Murray really loves. But I do think the Steelers, even though they've given up the fantasy points, I do think they're still not a bad pass defense. So Dortch and Moore, I think, are a little bit too risky for my liking. The Steelers, I like Deontay Johnson. I like George Pickens. I think this offense can really have a revival here now that Matt Canada's out of town, and this is a defense that they could probably take advantage of those opportunities. Johnson, pretty good target share. Last week, I think he had 7 targets, 5 receptions, only about 50 receiving yards. You don't love that, but you can survive with that. Pickens is the capable one of some downfield targets. We'll see what that looks like in week 2 of this new offense. Falcons at the Jets. I'm sure we're all very excited to watch this game. Tim Boyle and the Jets offense. I was looking at their wide receivers and who's been running the routes. Another team that'll be funny to talk about in a moment here. But for the Falcons, I would expect Bijan, Tyler Algier to be, straw that stirs the drink here for this offense. Why lean on the pass game when the Jets are the best in the NFL? 92.7 coverage grade from PFF, the number 1 defensive fantasy points allowed. So I'd expect the ground game to be the focus here. The Falcons, though, they're a really good run defense. The pass defense is about average in all of our categories here, right in the middle of the road. 13th in fantasy points allowed, 20th in EPA against the pass. So nothing to be too concerned about here from the Jets passing offense. It'll just be, what do we get from Tim Boyle? Is he going to just be like we saw last week, the hyper targeting of Garrett Wilson? Usually is what you see with the backup stepping in. I would expect that to continue here. So that means Garrett Wilson is like the only guy I'd be starting. Again, Jason Brownlee led the team in routes run last week. I looked at that, I'm like, who the hell is this? Third or undrafted free agent out of Southern Miss. Nothing to be worried about with him or Gibson. Again, this is how much the team really despises. This is where Aaron Rodgers and the fact that he's not even playing has affected the team, because Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb aren't playing because they're just not good enough, but Aaron Rodgers wanted them, and Aaron Rodgers isn't on the field to make them look any better than what they actually are. As for the Falcons, sits across the board. Drake London, I know, has been a pretty consistent guy for us. But when you look at the matchup with Sauce Gardner and this secondary for the Jets, not something I want to look to with Desmond Ridder at quarterback. So sitting everyone across the board there. Colts at the Titans, divisional matchup. We've got the Colts offense coming off a good win over the Bucks and get a good chance here for Gardner Minshew to continue from his success last week. The Titans 24th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, one of the worst coverage grades in the league as well, 30th in EPA against the pass. When you look at getting rid of trading the safety out to Philadelphia, defense has definitely taken a step back. As for the Colts, it's another week without Grover Stewart. I think this is the last week for the Colts defensive lineman in terms of suspension from his from PEDs. So it's going to help the Titans in the running game. Will Levis has been leaned on quite a bit the last couple of weeks, I've noticed. Like even the Panthers game, the passing volume is pretty solid. The matchup here with the Colts defense, very much middle of the road across the board in these categories. So not a team to be too concerned about when it comes to what they can do rushing the passer or even really in that secondary. So don't feel like this is a bad matchup, but I do think it's more leaning towards the ground game being the factor in this one. These Colts wide receivers, Michael Pittman coming off the big week, definitely want to play him here. You know, Jonathan Taylor is not, I don't think will be playing in this game, so that's going to be Zach Moss. Moss had a massive game against the Colts against the Titans earlier this year, 165 rushing yards. I don't think he's going to come anywhere near to replicating that. I do think the pass game will be more important here, so Josh Downs I do like. Alec Pierce is definitely a sit for me there. On the Titans side, as pretty much every week, this is a matchup where I can play DeAndre Hopkins. I'm going to be playing him and then sitting everyone else. Dolphins at the Commanders. Look, the Commanders are a team with Sam Howell and Eric Bieniemy calling plays where the pass volume is just going to be super high every week. The Dolphins are starting to become a more elite unit against the pass, 6th in EPA against the pass, one of the better coverage grades in the league too. But that's not going to stop the Commanders from throwing the ball, I don't think, because the Dolphins have a good run defense as well. But for the Dolphins, a matchup where we could see them get back to being that 40-plus point team, because the Commanders have been horrible against the pass. Dead last in EPA, second to last in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. That keeps us status quo with the Dolphins and their wide receivers, with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill being guys you absolutely want to start here. Waddle was a guy I wanted to sit last week, kind of burned me, put up like 100 receiving yards. So that wasn't exactly what I like to see, but I mean, honestly, it took a lot to be able to sit him. It was one of my more shallow leagues. Commanders though, I've said this preseason, I said this early in the season, Bieniemy's offense puts a ton of value in the slot wide receivers. Logan Thomas has kind of seen his performance deteriorate a little bit. Jahan Dotson running a little bit more of his routes out wide. Samuel being that consistent slot option for this team. I do think you can go to him off the big week. I think the Commanders will find themselves trailing really quickly in this game with the way their defense is played. McLaurin as being that outside target with the potential to hit some big plays too, which the Dolphins have been prone to give up this season. I will say that. Panthers at the Bucks. Both these teams, well, I would say the Bucks looking to bounce back. The Panthers looking to get back on the board here. Frank Reich gone. What does that mean for this offense? I was looking back to, I can't remember the OC's name, but he was calling plays for a couple game stretch that Frank Reich relinquished his play calling duties and then grabbed it back again just before he was fired. I found that the offensive coordinators taken back over the play calling duties did provide some pretty high passing volume in those games, and I think that'll be the case here. The Bucks, really good run defense, pass defense not so much, especially dealing with some injuries as well. They're 29th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position, 29th in EPA against the pass too. Thing is, for Bryce Young, blitzing. When he's blitzed, he's really struggled this year. He hasn't been one of the worst guys, but definitely in the bottom half of the league. Can he manage that against this Bucks defense that is blitzing at one of the highest rates in the league? As for the Bucks, I think the pass volume will be relatively low here. I know Chris Godwin nursing a bit of an injury. He's a question mark for this one. And the Panthers, because of that, because of their run defense struggles, teams haven't thrown the ball much against them. That's why they're a top 5 team in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. Don't think it has a lot to do with their talent. It really is just about that in my mind. So what I'm going to be doing is playing Mike Evans, but I am going to sit Chris Godwin because the volume just isn't going to be there in this game. The Panthers' opponents are throwing the ball just 29 times per game, one of the lowest in the league. And if Godwin doesn't get volume, he doesn't produce. He hasn't scored double-digit fantasy points in, I believe, 5 straight weeks. This will not be a different week for him, so I do lean towards him going under. If you're looking at player props, if you're looking at receptions, I think it's going to be a tough week for Chris Godwin. But for Evans, touchdown. When this team's looking to score touchdowns, this is their guy, and he's capable of creating big plays with limited opportunity. So I still do want to start him. Just would be lower in my rankings in terms of overall week. He'd be a back end wide receiver 2, probably front end wide receiver 3 for me. Panthers, Laviska Shenault going to IR. So we do have a consistent 3 guys on the field in Thielen, Chark, and Mingo. I know we'll see pass volume, but I just can't take the risk on any of these other guys. I would place Thielen, though, even with that brutal game, complete dud last week against the Titans. Browns at the Rams. What are the Browns doing at the quarterback spot? We will have to see closer to the end of the week here. I don't really think it has a huge impact on what I want to do with the receivers in this game. The Rams are a pretty solid pass defense. But PFF-wise and some of these advanced stats really hate them. But on the basis of just what they've given up, 14th in fantasy points, so more middle of the road. Browns defense we know is really, really good with that pass rush. 2nd in fantasy points allowed, the #1 team in EPA against the pass. Heavy amount of man coverage. That's going to have an impact on what we want to do when it comes to the start-sit spot. So Cooper Kupp has struggled a lot against man coverage this year. I believe he ranked maybe 140th in yards per route run against man coverage. His yards per route run was 0.82, incredibly low. So I do want to sit him. Wasn't a great week for him last week. Puka Nacua, though, was top 30 in yards per route run against man coverage. So I think he could potentially find some success. That's why I have Kupp as a sit, Nacua as a start. Going to be sitting Tutu Atwell as well. And then it's yet another week for me with the Browns. The pass volume was really high last week, and we still didn't really see anybody put together a performance, at least in the wide receiver spot, that behooved us to start them. I don't really think that changes here, even if the Rams are probably a worse pass defense than the one the Browns had last week against the Broncos. So I just can't put myself in a spot to start these guys, especially with Amari Cooper banged up as well. Big one here, 49ers, Eagles. Super excited for this one in the 4 p.m. slot. Hopefully get a repeat of Eagles-Bills from last week. Love that going into the Sunday night football game. These are 2 teams that have a ton of answers for the run game, and they're going to force their opponents to throw the football. It's a great sign for our wide receivers that we have in this game. On the season, the Eagles dead last in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. That is because of just what I said, how good they are against the run. Now for the Niners, still a pretty good pass defense, 91.5 coverage rate. I think that's 2nd, 3rd best in the league. 5th in EPA against the pass. 18th in fantasy points allowed, though, because again, passing volume is going to be high against them. Even with these plus matchups, it doesn't really change my start-sit decisions from week-to-week basis. I just feel even better about Deebo Samuel, feel better about Brandon Ayuk, feel better about A.J. Brown, and feel even better about Devontae Smith. Chiefs at the Packers. A Packers team that I believe is a 6.5-point underdog at home in this game. And you look at a Chiefs team looking to bounce back from some recent struggles. The Packers riding a bit of a high here, back-to-back wins. The Chiefs, though, dominate on the outside against wide receivers, have been really, really good with L'Jarius Sneed. Well, I was just blanking on who it was. L'Jarius Sneed has been excellent for this team. Bit of an island there when you're going up against him. Chiefs are 8th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, 3rd in EPA against the pass, and I think Sneed plays a huge, huge part in why that is the case. Good pass rush, too, as well. And then for the Packers, much more advantageous to run the ball on them. Pass defense has been pretty solid. 9th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. So pretty good unit here. That doesn't really change the way the Chiefs want to play, though. And Rashee Rice finally hit the 100-yard mark in a single game this year as a rookie. I love what he's been doing. I think he's a yards after the catch monster. I think he's a super talented player, and we're seeing that, come to light here in his fantasy performances. So moving forward, he's a guy I love starting week in and week out. The rest of these receivers, bit of a mixed bag, not enough to rely on in terms of volume. So I do want to sit these guys. I know Jaden Reed is battling injury here. If he does start, the Chiefs have given up a lot to slot wide receivers. Him and Watson get into the slot quite a bit. Jaden Reed pretty much exclusively, but Watson a closer split between the two, and then Watson being that red zone target. Dobbs will suffer here. He's the primary outside guy. I think he will be in tough here each and every snap if he's running with Sneed as well. So I'm going to be sitting Dobbs in this one. Monday Night Football, man, this game would have so much more juice if Joe Burrow was healthy, because these are 2 teams that before the season, or maybe even just a couple weeks ago before Burrow's injury, I think we're 2 of the best in the AFC. And now with Jake Browning at quarterback, really changes things for the Bengals. And the Bengals defense has taken a pretty big step back. Struggled against the run, now closer to the back half of the back third of the league in defense against the pass. PFF gives them a coverage grade of just 48.7. So potentially some success here for the Jags, and with Travis Etienne's status up in the air, could lead to some more passing volume. But for the Jags, elite run defense And that shows here in the fantasy points department because they got a good coverage grade. They're not a bad pass defense. They just see a ton of volume against their pass defense. That is why they're 27th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. And now that puts me in a spot here with the Bengals where we could see that pass volume pick up. I think Joe Mixon should see a lot of receiving volume. So I'm not quite there with T. Higgins battling injury, starting him or starting Tyler Boyd, but do feel, again, with the backup quarterback, you see a lot of volume to the wide receiver one on a team. Will be like that for Chase, I think, in this one as well, especially with the Jaguars and how good they are against the run. As for the Jags, I kind of went back and forth between these two guys, and then I said, well, we're in a week with 6 teams on bye. I don't think I can recommend sitting either one of Ridley or Kirk, with Ridley kind of coming on a little bit lately, and then Kirk being that consistent slot option that kind of has that high floor. I think you need that in a week like this. So I would be starting both of these guys, and then Zay Jones just hasn't quite come around yet at this point in the season that I would be sitting him. All right, that's every single matchup in week 13 of fantasy football. Guys, if you have questions, start sit at wide receiver or running back in your flex spots. Happy to answer those questions down below. Definitely drop them. We'll get to as many as I can before Sunday. And then as well, we're live on the OwnersBox Sports on Twitch, Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. If you guys have any last minute questions, anything changes injury-wise, you have questions for us, definitely we'll answer them there as well. We're live again, 11 a.m. Eastern time, going through every game, bets, fantasy advice, you name it. We're talking about it. So go check us out there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.